I have a question on a different topic. There's a significant number of people across the region who are being denied their basic, fundamental human right of a home of their own, a roof over their head. There are people in this county, in refuges, in hostels, women living in fear in their own home because they have nowhere to go, people sleeping in cars, people sleeping in, one person I heard that was sleeping in a wheelie bin, people sleeping on somebody else's sofa. This region receives 1.5% of the government's budget on homelessness. Here in Longford alone, last year, 88 people presented as homeless to Longford County Council. There are 1,188 people on Longford County Council social housing waiting list. Last year, they made offers of 121 social houses. What are the people on this panel here going to do about this problem if they are elected? And not a waffle, please. What are they actually going to do if they're elected?
Thanks very much for the question.
Not a waffle.
No, absolutely not a waffle.
You've heard her.
Yep. I suppose just to look at the situation, the housing is in an absolute crisis. It is an emergency. I just want to go through a couple of points. In the first 9 months of 2015, do you know how many houses were built by this government? 28. 28 houses in the first 9 months built across the state. We have 100,000 families on the social housing waiting list across the state. We have 5,500 people in emergency accommodation. We have 1,600 children in emergency accommodation. We have people living in substandard social housing. And what we are proposing, and this is our solution, what we are proposing is to invest 2.2 billion on top of what the government has put into it. And that money will be provided out of the fiscal space of 8.6 billion. So 2.2 billion on top of what the government are providing to provide 100,000 social and affordable houses by 2030. Part 5, what we want to do is Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act is to extend that to ensure and to provide 36,500 houses. For far too long, there has been absolutely no action whatsoever by this government on housing. Nothing. If you look right across the board...
Where's the money for all this investment?
Well, what I'm after saying to you, Sheila, is we have they're estimating that the fiscal space over the next number of years will be €8.6 billion. What we're saying is to take 2 billion out of that and put it towards housing. 2.2 billion on top of what the government are providing, to put it into housing, because it is an emergency. It needs an absolutely radical step to provide the kind of housing that's needed. And you said 120 offers in Longford last year. You know, really, when you talk about how many 1,300 families are on the housing waiting list, you know, what we're providing is nowhere adequate enough to what the problem is. It is a crisis, it is an emergency, and it needs to be resolved absolutely with immediate effect.
You all realise that this fiscal space is dangerous. It could exist, the money, depending on world economics. You know, we're in the most chaotic time, so actually we could have no fiscal space. So it could exist. That could be 8 billion, that could be nothing. It could be just 3 billion to play with. So what the Green Party are looking at is basically creating a new housing authority by getting rid or just amalgamating the housing agency and the housing finance agency, and then in getting money on the international markets from the cost rental model. Basically, we go out to international markets, say we need the money, and we're guaranteed payment because they're future rents. Okay, so just allow me with the rent idea. We give that money to local authorities, increasing the power of local authorities. They put it out to tender to local building contractors and they build. Now, what about the houses that people aren't going to be renting? Pure social housing that no one will be renting back from. For that, we're going to take 2% from Ireland's Strategic Investment Fund, the 7 billion in the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund. We're going to take 2 billion from that and build more, in other words, totally passive energy, in other words, carbon neutral homes, so social homes that won't require rent. In that way, it's very simple to do that. International investment will provide that money because we can guarantee rental income in the future. It will provide it at low cost, and we're promising 7,500 houses every year for the next 5 years.
Grant, every person, as we know in society, is entitled to decent housing, and that is my aim. And we are investing in social housing after decades of neglect. I mean, NAMA.
But how do you answer the 128 offers last year for
NAMA will build 20,000 residential units before the end of 2020. Recently, this government came along and increased the budget for homeless by 17 million, and we have also frozen rents for 2 years to give tenants stability in their own home.
What you did was you increased the rents. You made landlords increase their rent for 2 years.
I'm for a long time a great believer that we need
absolutely. If you're a landlord and you're saying we're going to introduce this rent certainty, if you're saying you're going to introduce the rent certainty in a number of months, isn't that giving landlords the opportunity to raise their rents, what we're going to do for the next 2 years, and give it to you in bulk for the next 2 years? That is an absolute cop-out.
This government also will deliver 35 new social housing units at the cost of 3.8 billion, and that's factual, and that's in our manifesto. And we also, and it's a personal thing, view of mine, that we also need to allow people more freedom to adapt and extend homes for elderly people, for elderly relatives, etc. This should be something that should be prioritised, and this is something that should be looked at. And we also we have a lot of derelict homes right around this county as well as right around the country, and we need to bring derelict building sites in the country back into use for accommodation. This is something that I have been advocating for quite a long time, and I have put this to the Minister for Housing on several occasions. We had the Minister for Housing here in the county. He visited a number of areas, Edgeworthstown and Granard, and we got funding for this type of work this year. 250,000 for Edgeworthstown and something in the region of 300,000 for the development of derelict houses in the Granard area.
Sorry?
Pardon?
About 10.
We have plenty of housing for our people.
No, I go back to what I said earlier about the responsibility for state responsibility being shifted onto communities. I last night was at the Simon launch for the Sleep Out to raise funds for the homelessness. It's throwing the responsibility back to communities to try and raise funds to provide for people that find themselves homeless. 1,032 families in Longford waiting on the social housing list. However, I've been out and about, folks, and I've been out engaging with people that are on those lists. And contrary to some people who have chosen not to go out and canvass, I'd just like to say that it is an eye-opener to see all the vacant social housing units that's boarded up in Longford. Absolutely. And I can tell you there's 85, so one of a very good high standard in a very good estate, all boarded up, and the neighbours around about could tell me it's boarded up. Sorry, Sheila, it's boarded up for 5 years, boarded up. We've 85 of them. That could accommodate 85 families off that social housing.
Absolutely. I absolutely do want to take that up, because Tess is absolutely right. We have nearly 1,200 people on our waiting list. My sister-in-law is the manager of the Vincent de Paul hostel out on the Dublin Road. And let me tell you, they are inundated with people looking for accommodation who are being thrown out of their accommodation by landlords, greedy landlords who are pushing up the rents and pushing them out of their homes. But not only that, we have 101 vacant units in Longford, and James has made reference to thousands that came into the county to do these up. We can only do 8 this year. We can only do 8. There are over 100 houses sitting that, a small investment by this government would allow all of those to be opened so that at least, but it's still tiny. You have 1,000 people. We have 100 vacant units. Why can you only do 8? Because the department won't give us the money. They just won't. All the talk at national level is get the voids back in there, but you go applying for the money and you can't get it. And I'm bringing it back down to local. That is not happening in the cities. It is happening here in Longford. We cannot get the money, but you can get it above in Dublin, because that's where the mass of people is. But James, the bottom line is 100
has invested more in ghost estates throughout this county.
Never mind the ghost estates. The ghost estates. I'm not talking about ghost estates. I'm not talking about the ghost estates. The ghost estates have been taken on board by the local authority, and they are successfully being finished. Right? But I'm talking about the voids. I'm talking about the fact that no social housing is planned for either being built, because we've got no money despite applying for it. We've got no investment to do that. So, what I'm saying, and yet this government, and I'm kind of going outside of Longford when I say this, but this government has allowed NAMA to sell off properties taken back off people, and you've stood by and watched it happen.
Every single town across County Longford and indeed across Westmeath has got funding to refurbish derelict homes. And I mean, Longford has got the highest per head of population in the country to upgrade derelict homes, and that's factual. That information is out there. I mean, recently we had the Minister for Housing down in County Longford, and he approved funding for the refurbishment of housing in Mastermokes in Edgeworthstown to the tune of 250,000. We have a programme going for Granner.
Right,
but the local authority has not submitted the plans. And
so you're blaming the local authority?
I blame Maeve for that.
You're blaming the local authority. Okay, James, I'll get you the facts and figures about what has been applied for. The reality is we have 101 vacant units for the last, and Connie is right, up to 5 years they're sitting there since you were in government, and we can't get the money to do them. And it's a scandal and it's a disgrace for all those families that are on waiting lists and in places like Vincent de Paul Hostels, and as Connie said, living in appalling conditions. It's a disgrace.
You apologise to me.
We've no affordable housing.
Apologise for blaming.
We are dealing with years of neglect by you when you were in the government.
Let's Barbara Smith has her hand up. Let her make her point.
I've been knocking on doors the last number of months, and the amount of families, 2 and 3 families living in the one home, it's actually quite shocking. We have a lost opportunity over the last number of years. We have been paying millions and millions to private landlords for social housing. Millions. We have NAMA selling off our assets to vulture capitalists for nothing. That is a completely, it's at odds with each other. We should have been, local authorities should have been allowed work with NAMA to build up their social housing stock. If that was allowed, we would not be in the mess we're in at the moment.
Okay, Gabrielle, do you want to take that point?
I just want to, Thanks, Sheila. I just wanted to come back to Tessa's point, and I think it's really very valid. I have clinics all over the constituency, and it breaks my heart, and I'll be very honest with you now. People out there think politicians aren't human, but we are actually human, and it breaks my heart when I get people sitting opposite me telling me about the fact that they're homeless, or that they're going to be made homeless in the foreseeable future, with children and sleeping on couches, and there's an awful lot of homeless that we don't actually know about. I work very closely. I work very closely with the Midland Simon community, and actually we had an increase when the Midland Simon community got an almost 25% increase in their funding, because I lobbied really, really strongly with Minister Alan Kelly for it, and to lighten things a little bit, I even slept with Brian Cowan for the Simon community. McFadden sleeps with Cowan. I slept out with the Simon community in Burghcastle to raise funds for the Simon community. And again, that's volunteerism.
But essentially, do you not have what is a charity there?
Yes, and I agree with you.
A number of people have mentioned here, filling the gap.
That's
essentially what we are talking about.
That's what I was coming to.
That
shouldn't be the case, and I agree with you completely. And a few of the things that I am looking at doing now, I started, but I haven't actually had the time yet, is one of the things I feel very strongly about is that the government spend a lot of money every month renting houses from private landlords on behalf of tenants, and they pay 650, 750, 800 euro a month for a family. That money could pay a mortgage, but councils are not allowed by legislation to buy houses or take out mortgages. So I think that that's wrong, and I think that councils should be able to do that. It shouldn't be down to housing associations either, because on housing associations you have all sorts of different types of people who have vested interests and whatever. And I think, not in all of them, obviously, but you can have politicians, or and they shouldn't have a say.
Do you have an issue with the work of the housing
No, absolutely not. I think the housing associations are amazing, but I think that there are politicians on housing associations, and they shouldn't have the ultimate say as to who gets a house. A person should get a house because they need a house. And I think if the council could borrow money to take out mortgages, they could house families and to be way more cost effective than what is being done now. The other thing I would suggest too is that, and I've asked the Minister for Finance to look at this for me, is to regenerate towns that are, towns. When I grew up, when I was born, I was reared in Connaught Street in Athlone. I was reared over a pub on a main street in Athlone. And families reared parents rears their families over shops on the main street, and there are a lot of shops in all over this constituency, in Longford and everywhere, that have upstairs that are not being used, and there should be some sort of an incentive for a business to do up the upstairs of their house. An awful lot of single men, or separated men particularly, find it very hard to get housing because they're last on the list. If you have a woman and children, they're going to get priority. But if you have a single man or a separated father, he can't get a home. There are 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments or flats up over businesses that should be incentivised to open up for that, and I'm working on that.
James Morgan.
Thanks, Sheila. Sheila, I'll be quick. I was out in a house in Lanesborough during the week, and they have a mortgage, about 100,000. The wife is terminally ill. The husband had to give up his job, so they're unable to pay for the house. That particular house has been sold from an Irish bank. It's been sold on to one of the vulture capitalists. They are going to have to move out of that house. Then they're going to look for social housing. What's happened here is there are 13,000 houses are going to be sold to vulture funds. A significant amount of those are unoccupied, and they're selling them to the Americans and the Canadians, who will actually make all of the profit from these over the course of the next 5 or 6 years as the economy hopefully improves. But we are not going to see the benefit of that because they have sold all of those properties. They've sold the family silver to the Americans, to the Canadians, and the British.
May you just want to make a point there? So I'm going to let you in on one, and then we'll go back to the floor. I think there's really time for one question. Maybe will Tara allow me that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Just reference was made to the regeneration of areas to facilitate housing, as Gabby has said, in relation to people who perhaps wouldn't get a family home because of the pressure for families to receive a family home as opposed to an apartment. The reality is, and I said it earlier on in the day, 1.5 million went to Athlone for regeneration, 1.5 went to Mullingar. We didn't get anything. Well, we got 150,000, but that was from a different project. So, I'm just saying, this is all pie in the sky. We need to focus on what is needed in our community, and we need to work to get it. And we need to ensure that the politicians that we elect are going to do that for us, and that they're not going to be working in 2 counties.
Okay.
Has to be kept.
Donald, make a point there. Paul wants to come in then, and then we'll just briefly. Please.
The reason we have the problems with housing in Ireland is because the government have decided that housing will be private property developer led. The ethos for this government is, and the last, is the private developer will take care of the house. All housing should be a civil right and a human right in Ireland, and as such, the funding for those houses should come from central government. The repayments should go to central government. And it's not a difficult job to get the county council to put the tenders out for the different areas, the different types of construction for these houses, and then, depending on your ability to repay. Now, the repayment should only be at most 0.5% to cover cost. It's housing. It's the biggest single social problem we have in this country. If everyone here today and associated with this institution could safely say that I'm not going to lose my house no matter what happens, that would de-stress the whole community to a great degree. Now, just on the last point, to prove what I'm saying, last June, maybe a little bit before last June, the governor of the central bank brought a rule in where you have to have 20, 25, 15% deposit for housing. This had nothing to do with a housing demand that he said he was going to try and stifle a bubble. This had got to do with forcing you into the rental situation because the banks were carrying these buy-to-let properties on their books and they were burst. That's why the rent prices have gone up, which allows the banks to sell to the vulture funds that are coming in. That's the reason, and that's what's been done to you on a daily basis. But you have to make your minds up. Do you want the same again? Put this current government back in. Or we'll be here again next year saying the same thing.
Yeah, just one point I wanted to mention, and it was in relation to private homeowners, and that is in relation to those who are in mortgage distress. The Land and Conveyancing Act that was passed by this government has exacerbated the problem in housing because effectively what that act did, it gave a veto to the banks to repossess your home if you're in mortgage distress. And in the first 6 months of last year, 6,000 repossessions, absolutely exacerbating the housing problem that we have. And that's government policy. The only way you can change that is to change your elected representatives.